So the last video we left off with finishing up the sand around the palm tree base and then doing a little bit of shading inside the circle skull for the sun. So now we are moving on to this video, starting off with the graphics that are going inside the skull on beside the skull head and inside the circle of the sun. So I'm going to show you guys. I've already jumped ahead a little bit. The customer came over and we were talking about things to do on this, adding more and what else we need to do to get this thing completed. So when I was talking to him, I was pretty much already ahead of this, so he loved it. So I went ahead and finished it up. I'm going to show you guys. I'm going to walk you through what I did with it. So I've got it all taped up right now. There's no paint on it, but this is the outer edge of that circle, but it's on the outside of the skull. So it's in that little area that we shaded from the last video. From this, inside this, it's probably about that wide. So there's not enough room to do a bunch of stuff, but there's enough room to do something. And we want to do like a crazy design, I guess, inside there to kind of help bring in all the colors and make this thing stand out more. So what I came up with is something pretty cool. It's pretty easy to understand, but it's going to look kind of wicked. So I got these, you can tell where I taped it off, fine lined it. So it's pretty much like a horseshoe, let's say it's a U, right? It's a U that's gone onto a point at the top and it's kind of floating sideways. So I just pretty much mimicked it and I did two of them. The inside one's a little bit smaller. So that's what I did on both sides. So when you peel that off, it's going to look pretty crazy. It looked pretty crazy with just a fine line, but it's just something I threw up real quick. And I thought that would work perfect for this and this design to kind of make everything pull together. And it's going to give the circle some depth as if it's actually a sphere. So that's the reason why I did this particular graphic, is it's gonna make it more look like a sphere and it's actually rotating around. So I'm gonna go ahead and get this thing in paint. We're all prepped up and ready. I'm using the original blue that I used for these flames. So it's the original blue for that, and we're just gonna base it in there with our airbrush. I just pulled the masking off this, so I'm really happy with the way it came out. In person, it's got a really crazy, kind of like a pearlescent flop to it. Got a little bit of overspray right there on the gray, but other than that, pretty good. When you're pulling this stuff, if you're wondering how I pulled my tape, you want to make sure this stuff is completely dry and flashed off. That way, if you do accidentally touch it, it will not affect it. And when you're peeling the tape off of it, it tends to do better rather than pulling it from wet paint, because wet paint still has to settle. So you want to make sure it's completely dry. And then I just usually start from the top. The way I fine line this off is everything ended up at the top. So I started at the top and pulled everything at once, and it pretty much came off in one swipe. So depending on how you lay out your fine line and your masking is how you're going to be able to pull it. But next we're going to take, I've got a candy, I'm going to tell you what it is. It's Oriental Blue. And the one thing that I noticed when I did the glow effect around the sun, when I added the blue into it, it made this super bright on the outside. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that candy, I'm going to dilute it, and I'm just going to make a one pass around the entire frame of it, kind of just to dull it down, if you will. And then if I need to come back in with white, I can touch it up or whatever. But that's the plan, is to dull that circle down, that way it's not so bright white, because that is literally just straight white. So adding this blues and all this different color blues into it has made that white really pop, which we don't want it to pop that much. So we're going to dull it down a little bit. So I went through and I got the candy blue around the sphere, Also put a little bit inside the water to give it a nice little reflection rather than it just be bright white through this whole thing. So I want to talk about this outer sphere a little bit. So what I did was, since I decided it was too bright with just white, took some candy oriental blue and I made a couple passes. It's really diluted when I do this to shoot it through an airbrush, so it doesn't build up quite as fast, because I don't want it to be a bright blue, because when you do oriental blue, it'll turn like a bright, like a tealish, greenish blue. So I didn't want that. I just want a little bit to hit against that white, and it don't take much against white. It'll build really fast. So really diluted, went through that, all that, let it dry. Pretty much it dries really quick for a candy. And then I went through with the bright white, and I went back through and I did like a little bit of a highlight around it. Now this is what I want to talk to you guys about. So with a candy, if you're putting colors over candy, that candy is going to absorb so much of it, because that's just what it does. It's a candy. So anything you put over top of it, like this bright white I did, I can already tell in a lot of spots it's just sunk back in there, because that candy is going to absorb all that color. So if you're wanting to get that full effect, like this is kind of like a neon look, I would guess you call it. It's got that bright white in the center and then the color on the outside of it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave it just like this, and then when I clear it, because I'll be clear coating all this when I'm finished with it, and then when I block it back down and I'm getting ready for doing like touch-ups or anything I need to do before I send it off, I'm going to go back around with that white, very little of it, and I'm going to highlight some of the areas I want to highlight, because that clear will act as a barrier against that candy. It'll trap it in there, so that white won't be able to get to that candy, if that makes any sense. A lot of guys will put like intercoat clear over it and things, or clear coat it. They'll do some type of sealant to seal that up for candy, to put their shadows or your highlights or anything like that against it to hide it from hitting that candy. Which you can do that intercoat clear, you can do just fine. A lot of guys will do intercoat clear on every single layer of graphic they do, just to block it out, make sure that next color doesn't get to that other color. A lot of guys will use it against when they're using a lot of candy. So me, I'm just gonna wait till I clear it and block it back down and do all my touch-ups, and re-clear it after that point, because I'll be the one clearing this anyway. So that's the time when I do my touch-ups, is after I get it done cleared. If I can do them beforehand, I will certainly do those as far as the easier things go, but I want to get that coat of clear on there to trap all that stuff in there. That way when I go do a touch-up, I don't have to worry about anything else but the touch-up. So that's just a little, for me to you, a little tip. I'm going to say use intercoat clear 90% of the time, because it will dry really quick and you get to your next layer. Clear coat, you have to, it's a mess. You have to really mask everything off. Clear coat, you're not really able to just, hit this wherever your problem is. You can't really just hit it. You got to do the whole panel, or else you'll see a halo when you go through and re-clear the whole panel again. Intercoat clear, you can get away with doing little small spots. So that's just a little trick. So I'm going to say just use intercoat clear if you got it next to you. I don't use intercoat clear that much at all, so I just don't do it. But yeah, I just clear everything and then do my touch-ups and go from there. So and also I extended down the ocean a little bit down here, and let it kind of play itself out a little bit more. So next up, we're going to be tackling this skeleton against this palm tree. Talked about it, figured out a game plan with it, so that is going to be the next step. But I just want to show you guys what it looks like, because it came out really killer. And then we're going to do something inside of here. So this is not going to stay. This is going to be filled with stuff. So get excited, because that's going to be a really cool part. I'm really looking forward to doing the skeleton, just because it's going to tie all this stuff in together. It'll kind of finish this rather than it just be a palm tree out in the middle of nowhere and some sand, things like that. And then the last thing that's going to tie this all together is this circle right here. So There's going to be a lot of work within that circle as well as the skeleton, because those are going to be skeleton mainly and the palm tree are the main two things. Obviously the sun is huge and it's bright and it's in your face, but these are the things I want to add in here that make your eye go right to them when you see this thing going down the road. So yeah, I'm gonna call it quits right here. This may be the end of this video. I might carry it on to the next one. So if it ends right here, I'll see you on the next one. If not, I'll see you tomorrow. All right, so I got it all chalked out. I'll show you guys here. Some of it's pretty light, some of it's pretty drastic as far as the chalk outline goes. The feet, I didn't really finish anything down here because like I said, we're gonna roll up his pant legs a little bit, and then we're gonna make that rock. So that rock you can kind of tell from the bottom of him versus the ground. So we're just gonna make this a rock right there, but his back is fully against it. I mean, it's perfectly lined up right here with his back. And then he's got some ruffles right here where it's got some, where he's starting to lean over in his shirt. So I'm pretty happy with it. When you're doing something like this, you want to transfer over as much detail as possible. Just because, let me turn this light off. This light might be just a little bit too bright to be able to tell. I don't know if that makes any better for you guys. Thought the glare, but you want to transfer over as much detail from the image as possible, because that is your proportions. A lot of people, when they see this, they think it's called cheating or whatever, but it's really just to get your proportions done. A lot of times I'll draw something out and I'll just redo it, and until I get a reference of what I'm drawing, things don't really come together as far as proportions go. So it's always good to make sure you have everything in line with each other, because if your proportions are off, it's going to really show in your drawing. And then once you start airbrushing it, it's going to really show, because everything's just going to be off. So make sure you get every little detail done. Make sure all your proportions are right. Make sure you're not playing the guessing game of trying to get everything lined up perfectly, and it will be a much faster process for you. So I'm going to back up here a little bit so you guys can see how big he is compared to the palm tree, which his head is about a little bit right here. So he's going from here all the way down to here. So I mean, he's pretty big, but he's not so big that's just going to take over everything. I played this game with the customer a little bit as far as how big we should make them. And I told him, I was like, well, since the palm tree is relatively big, and since of you yourself standing next to the palm trees are really, really tall. So you want to proportion it right. You don't want to make, since we got a big palm tree, you don't want to make him huge, because in real life, people are going to think that it's out of place. It's just whacked off. You know, it's not. It looks wacky. So you want to make sure when you're doing things like this, even though this isn't, you know, realistic by any means, but as far as the proportions go of the images and your drawings and what you're painting, you got to play that in your head. Like, how big is a person next to a palm tree when they're sitting down? You get what I'm saying? So you want to kind of go through that process with your customers, because you want to make sure everything makes sense, whether you're doing, you know, realistic, fantasy, whatever type of artwork you're doing. Make sure you're still within the realm of, you know, making it make sense to everybody when they see this. So that's why we didn't make them really huge or really tall. We wanted to make it make sense to people when they look at it and be like, oh, that's actually within reason of a real human sitting there next to a palm tree with how big the palm tree is. So hopefully that makes sense for you guys. But I'm going to leave everything where it was. I just kicked the chair. So I meant to not move that at all, because when I start going with this, even though I've got it mapped out, I'm going to go in and I'm going to print off that same image for a reference and place it right next to me. That way I can keep looking back and forth at the image and what I'm doing. And then sometimes I might even kick on the projector again and just fill in anything that I missed, make sure everything's there. And then once we get everything mapped in, I'll probably do it all in like a really light gray. And then once we get everything mapped in is when we can start like kind of messing with it and customizing a little bit, but we want to get it mapped in first. So that's going to be the start of the next video, is getting this thing mapped out. So I'm pretty excited for it because this is going to really bring everything together. And then once we get this guy done, we can move on to the center of that sun, which is it's a mini mural. So he's let me have free reign with it. He's got some ideas that he wants in there, but he's pretty much let me do what I want to do in it. So it's got some symbolism throughout the whole thing that has to do with the Grateful Dead. And, you know, I've really wanted to make this side of the van almost like one of their posters, which I don't have them anywhere right here. So if you're new to this, if this is your first video or watching, I've talked about this a little bit, but I really wanted to do the side of the van to make it look like one of their posters. If you know anything about their posters, they're pretty crazy. I've got a few around here that are just sitting around. They're all done by, I think some of these are done by the same artist, some aren't, but they're just, Grateful Dead posters are just crazy. Their t-shirts are crazy. They just pack a lot of stuff in there. I really wanted to do that with this, but the customer wasn't really thrilled about having a lot of stuff happening in this, because he's had this image in his head that he wanted to do since he was almost a little kid. So in the middle of that circle though, what we're going to put in here, he's let me have that free reign to make that look like one of their posters. So that's going to be pretty cool. It's going to tie everything together. It's going to have a lot of symbolism in it. It's going to have a little Easter eggs here and there in it. But I'm pretty happy with how this is coming out. The customer is stoked about it, and we're getting close to almost the ending of all this. So once we get this side done, I do my touch-ups and all that other stuff, we're going to move on to the back here and do some cool stuff on the back too. And then once that all is all wrapped up, we're going to really, you know, set this side off and do some pinstriping to set the rest of this off. So there's more to come. There's a lot more work to do before we can actually get down and clear coat it. But if you're, like I said, if you're new here, there's a lot more to go. And if you want to learn some things along the way, I'm willing to, you know, help out when I can, or explain things as I go the best I can. So if you have any questions, just put comments down there below this video, and I'll get back to you guys as soon as I can. Until then, I'll see you on the next one.